Welcome again to the prophetic mirror, and this is where we explore the prophecies of the Bible, and more so the prophecies of the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. This is part 3 of Revelation chapter 13 verses 17, the coming financial crisis. This is part 3 of those presentations. And I know that we are being prepared for the stupendous things that are about to happen on the face of the earth. And so wherever you are tuned in, welcome to this presentation. And my prayer is that the Lord may help us continue growing together. The Lord may help us continue growing together, and we may continue doing His will. In part 1 of the presentation, I went through the crisis, and I mostly looked at the issue of becoming debt-free and living within our means. And then in part 2, I looked at the issue of the banks, how they relate with us, the banking system, and how they plunge us in debt and keeps us being dependent on them. And today I'm going to look at still continuing with the financial systems of this world and how they make us be dependents. That is where I'm going to look at, and how I pray that the Lord of Heaven will help us to grasp whatever we are going to learn in this day. And so God is good, and He has enabled us to look into these things so that we may not be caught unaware. And so let us give Him thanks. Our Heavenly Father, thank you once again this day. As we study together, may you continue revealing the deep things of heaven unto us. In Jesus' name, amen. Why does God want us to know about these things? I'll start in the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs 22 verses 3, we read, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple person and are punished." The reason why God wants us to look into these things so that we may be prudent, we may be wise, and we may not be like a simple man and be overtaken in things. And so as I go through this, ask yourself, what will God want me to learn from this? More so we are looking at the issue that no man might buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast. How is this going to affect me? Going to the presentation of today, we read, "At the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep all law. At the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine but human. The centralizing of wealth and power, the vast combinations for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many, the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution, all are tending to involve the whole world in struggle similar to that which convulsed France." This is Education, the book Education, page 228, paragraph 2. And so we are about to be plunged in a state of affair that many will not know even what has swept them. Many will not know what has swept them. And in 1990, there is Testimonies to the Church, volume 9, page 13. This is what we read. As we see the economic collapse being voiced by everyone, and people wanting to control the markets, what to buy, who to buy, who can buy and who can sell, what they can buy, we see that there is a crisis that we are in. And what does inspiration tell us? There are not many, even among the educators and statesmen, who comprehend the cause that underlie the present state of society. Those who hold the reins of government are not able to solve the problems of moral corruption, poverty, pauperism, and increasing crime. They are struggling in vain to place business operations on a more secure basis. If men will give more heed to the teaching of God's word, they will find a solution of the problems that perplex the world. And we are told that the gospel is what? A simplifier. The gospel is a wonderful simplifier of life's problem. It is instruction, when heeded, will make plain many a perplexity and save us from many an error. It teaches us to estimate things at their true value and to give the most effort to the things of greatest worth, the things that will endure. This lesson is needed by those upon who rest the responsibility of selecting a home. They should not allow themselves to be diverted from the highest aim. Let them remember that the home on earth is to be a symbol of and a preparation for the home in heaven. Life is a training school from which parents and children are to be graduated to the higher school in the mansions of God. As the location for home is sought, let this purpose direct the choice. Be not controlled by the desire of wealth, the dictates of fashion, or the customs of society. Consider what will tend most to simplicity, purity, health, and really worth. And so, as people are getting more greedy and greedy, they want to invest in real estate. They want to buy mansions and all that. God is saying that the gospel is a wonderful symbol of the world's problem. And so as the statesmen and the businessmen are trying to put their operation on secure basis, there is nothing that they will be able to do if they don't understand that only in Christ can these things be achieved. But then the financial system of this world is promising people a secure basis. But at the end of the day, they have a goal to enslave everyone that has been put under their system. And so we continue with our presentation. That and this is, I told you that I'm going to look so much in the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island by Edward G. Griffiths, where the bankers and the money men met to put a strategy on how they can control the finances of this world by introducing a Federal Reserve System. Edward G. Griffiths in his book goes ahead to ask, how can the bank's managers continue in conscience or concerns to fund such genocidal regimes? And so if you never understood this, you'll understand as we go through this that the money we put in the banks and the people who service it and all that happens, it doesn't just go in normal businesses, but actually it goes in funding things which actually, if we ever knew, we will not be involved in their financial system. Part of the answer is that they are not permitted to have conscience. David Dunn, head of banks of Ethiopia desk, explained, political distinctions are not something our charter allows us to take into account. And so they don't care what you are going to do with money. You can lie to them and they will just give you the money to go to do what you want with it. 2, the greater part of the answer, however, is that all socialist regimes have the potential for genocide, and the bank is committed to socialism. George Bernard Shaw, one of the early leaders of the Fabian socialist movement, expressed it this way: under socialism, you will not be allowed to be poor. You will be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed, whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character and industry enough to be worth all this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner, but whilst you are permitted to live, you will have to live well. Now, if you understand what these people are saying, that banks must so promote or are committed to what they call socialism. And they say that you will be fed, you will be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed whether you liked it or not. And so this is what we call you will own nothing and be happy. And so all these things that are taking place in order that we may have the 15-minute cities, we may have people enclosed in some places. These things are being funded and the banks can escape this because it is the plans that the devil has put in place to fund these things so that the devil may be able to accomplish his desire. And so they will allow you to live so long as you dance to their tune. But when you do not dance to their tune, they will execute you in a kindly manner. Very strange language that the financial system of this world is working towards. And that is what they do. And talking about just being killed kindly, think about the nations who refuse to dance alongside the IMF regulations. The finances are withdrawn and they have to be killed kindly. They collapse, famine ravages the lands, there is no food, recession is so high, and then you find that inflation is so high. They have killed you kindly. Think about the promotion of what we call the same-sex marriages and accepting these sexual orientations that are in the society. And if you have to raise a voice, then actually financial assistance is cut off. In fact, there is a plan to make sure that God is removed from the land. And in which way? To promote this genderless or confusion of gender around the world. And so people are taught that they are trapped in the bodies that are not theirs. And so this contradicts the book of Romans chapter 1 and other parts of the book of Leviticus, but yet their strategy is that they may face off God on the face of the earth. And so it is only, we can only be naive if we don't see what the big people and their monies are doing and the fundings that they are doing to make sure that God is not recognized in the land. And so at the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine but human, the centralizing of wealth and power to the vast combination for the enriching of the few at the expense of many, the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution, all are tending to involve the world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. And you know, when people got tired of the regimes that were there and the church at that time, they resorted to the goddess of reason. And thus the saga continues. After pouring billions of dollars into underdeveloped countries around the globe, no development has taken place. In fact, we have seen just the opposite. Most countries are worse off than before the saviors of the world got to them. Very interesting what Edward G. Griffin says in the book, The Creature from the Jekyll Island. And he continues to say, capital for the IMF and the World Bank comes from the industrialized nation, with the United States putting up the most. Funds consist partly of hard currencies such as the dollar, yen, mark, and franc, but these are augmented by many times that amount in the form of credits. These are merely promises by the member governments to get the money from their taxpayers if the bank gets into trouble with its loans. While the IMF gradually evolving into a central bank for the world, While the IMF is gradually evolving it into a central bank for the World Bank is serving as its lending arm. As such, it has become the engine for transferring wealth from the industrialized nations to the underdeveloped countries. While this has lowered the economic level of the donating countries, it has not raised the level of the recipients. The money has simply disappeared down the drain of political corruption and waste. Now he goes into meat matters, flesh matters. And he says, by 1989, inflation was running at an average of 5,000%. And in the summer of that year, topped at a million thousands, banks were offering interest rates of 600% per month in hopes of keeping deposits from being moved out of the country. People were rioting in the streets for food, and the government was blaming greedy shop owners for raising prices. The nation was hopelessly in debt with no way to repay. Brazil is run by the military, and the state controls the economy. Government-owned companies consume 65% of all industrial investment, which means that the private sector is limited to 35% and is shrinking. The government used loans from US banks to create an oil company, Petróleo Brasileiro SA, which became Latin America's largest corporation. Despite huge oil deposits and record high oil prices, the company operated at a loss and was not even able to produce enough gasoline for its own citizens. By 1990, inflation was running at 5,000%. Since 1960, its prices had risen to 164,000 times their original level. A new crime was invented called hedging against inflation, and people were arrested for charging the free market price for their goods and for using dollar or gold as money. Led by communist organizers, mobs roamed the streets shouting, "We are hungry. Steal what you will." The nation was hopelessly in debt with no way to repay. Now, after receiving more than $3 billion in loans, it nationalized the nation's farms and industries and converted every business into a government agency. I want you to see what is happening. That let us pause for a minute. Those who didn't watch part 1 and part 2, you can go back and watch part 1 and part 2, and then you'll be helped by part 3. They give grants and loans to nations which seems to be collapsing, and this is what happens. Many of the third world countries, the materials they use for their industrialization and production of things comes from other countries. And so what happens, actually, there is a recession of these materials. And when there is a recession, what we automatically get into is an inflation. When the demand is so high and the material is very little, the prices of that which is there is hiked, and that is what we call the inflation. But since also these countries don't produce the materials, the third world countries, they have to go outside to get this material. But as they go outside, you find that the standard purchasing currency is the dollar, and it has risen its value to more than actually what the countries can meet, the prices the countries can meet. And what does the World Bank do? What does the Central Bank do? What does the federal system do? It advances loans to these nations to be able to get their products so that they may be able to continue with their economic. But now, one thing you find that they get the loans when the interests are so high, when the dollar is so high, and once the material are there, it seems like the recession actually is not there. It disappears, and then the inflation is also cut off. And then you have the materials and you have your little monies. And so you find that the money you bought, the products, is not the money also that you sell it. Again, you have to sell at the lower prices, sell it fast and go and get others. make a small profit and bring more materials, and so that you may meet the requirements of repaying the loans. But in part 2, we saw that the World Bank will not want the countries to repay off the loan. They have to be serviced because they thrive on the interest that are paid on this loan. So they will never allow you to finish up paying the loans. Now, this is the game of monopoly, by the way. At the end of the day, the normal people on the ground, the poor people, are the one which feels the impact of this thing so much, because now when things, basic commodities are hiked in a country, it has to lead these people into servitude. And you hear about people working 24/7, in that there is no time for worship, there is no time for family. The devil has put in a strategy that there is no place for family. And so you find that here is a family, the father has to work 24/7 to get food for this family. There is no morning worship, there is no evening worship, and the weekends that he could have spent with the children and catch up with them what they are doing in school, or whichever, their spirituality, their mannerism and all that, it is not there. He is out looking for more money so that things may be easier. The mother also, because economy has become so hard, she is ignorant of how the children should grow, and also goes to what we call casual labors in the village, only to come back and the children have what we call the street education. They have mingled with other children, they have learned what they can learn, they have learned all the evils that you can think about, and there is this thing called the TV. While the parents go to look for food for the children are left with the TVs in the house, with these free stations, which their only airings or their only programs are to plunge the children into immorality, evil things and robbery and all that, premature adults and all that stuff. And so you find that the devil himself has put in the strategy to make sure that there is no God. And so as the nations are plunged into debt and reservicing the debts, the parents feels the sting of the economy, and then there is the neglect of raising up the children the way they should be raised. And you wonder why the society is so immoral. It is because something is happening somewhere and people don't know it. You think that you can solve this problem by just attending to some something on the lower level, but on the highest level there's something happening that you really can know about. And unless we understand what is happening around the world, we shall continue living a life that is really a life that we don't understand. And so, you see, after receiving more than $3 billion in loans, it nationalized the nation's farms and industries and converted every business into government agency. You see, now the recession is there, the inflation is so high, and so the people can't be able to run their businesses. And what happens? The government takes over these things. It built a truck assembly plant, a tire factory, electronic factories, highways, ports, railways, and dams. Tanzania's industrial production and agricultural output fell by almost 1/3. Food was the main export in 1966. Under socialism, food had to be imported, paid for by foreign aid and more loans from the World Bank. The country is hopelessly in debt with no way to repay. Very interesting, because we are told there above that the banks are for socialism. And under socialism, food has to be imported, paid for foreign aid and more loans from the World Bank. Instead of the countries thinking of a strategy to be independent, they are always dependent upon these financial systems of the world. Now, those are the two countries, Brazil and Tanzania. Let us go to Argentina. We are told Argentina had one of the highest standards of living in Latin America. But then it became the recipient of massive loans from the World Bank as well as commercial banks in the United States. Since the money was given to politicians, it was used to build the only system politicians know how to build: socialism. What are the banks for? They are banned for socialism. By 1982, the gross national product was in a nosedive. Manufacturing had fallen to less than half of capacity. Thousands of privately owned companies had been forced into bankruptcy, what I have been just saying, and unemployment was soaring, and so was the welfare. Continuing on, the experience in Mexico was a carbon copy of that in Brazil, except that the amount of money was larger. When the world's fourth largest oil reserves were discovered, Mexican politicians reached for the brass ring. With billions borrowed from US banks, they launched Petróleos Mexicanos, Pemex, and soon became the world's fifth largest oil producer. They also built chemical plants and railroads and launched many other industrial projects. These were run as welfare agencies instead of businesses. Too many people on the payroll, too many managers, excessive salaries, too many holidays, and unrealistic benefits. The ventures floundered and lost money. Private businesses failed by the thousands and unemployment rose. The government increased the minimum wage, causing more businesses to fail and more unemployment. That led to more welfare and unemployment benefits. To pay for that, the government borrowed even more and began creating its own fiat money. Inflation destroyed what was left of the economy. Price controls were next, along with rent and food subsidies, and doubling what? The minimum wage. By 1982, Mexicans were trading their pesos for dollars and sending their savings out of the country. As the peso became all but worthless in commerce, in 1891, the average wage for Mexican workers was 31% of the average wage of Americans. By 1988, it had fallen to 10%. Mexico, once one of the major food exporters in the world, was now required to import millions of dollars worth of food grains. This required still more money and more loans. All this occurred while oil prices were high and production was booming. A few years later, when oil prices fell, the failures and shortfalls became even more dramatic. In 1995, Mexico's bank loans were once again on the brink of default, and once again, what? US taxpayers were thrown into the breach by Congress to cover more than $30 billion at risk. Though this loan was eventually repaid, the money to do so was extracted from the Mexican people through another round of massive inflation, which plunged their standard of living even lower. The nation is now hopelessly mired in socialism. The Communist Party, promising reform and still more socialism, is attracting a large following and could become a potent political force. Let us pause for a while. What is the biggest problem here? It is people, and more so the greedy people of the nations, wanting to live a standard of life they can't afford. And this recession and inflation is deliberately caused by these men. And at what cost? At the cost of taxpayers, whom actually they bring into problem of raising basic commodities, because they know that the people can't survive without the basic commodities. They are raised up and they are the ones who pay these loans, not the people who borrowed them. In fact, when this money is borrowed, you will never find that the normal people are benefited by it. It is the big people in the government who benefit from them. But when it comes to paying back, it goes back to the common people. And even the common people themselves, it is because they don't want to live within their means. And they don't want to venture into the system of Eden and go back to farming in a way that they will be able to provide for their families. And this has been our failure even today in this country, Kenya. People wanting to live the life they can't afford and depending so much on this table banking, merry-go-rounds, and these lending firms, so that they may do multiple of things instead of just venturing on one thing and doing it with all due diligence, having faith in God that He will be able to accomplish that which He has promised He will accomplish. People have more faith in the lending firms of this world, which also have been lent money, and they think that they can thrive on these things. And so the results is what we are reading right now. In India, let us see in India then. In India, the World Bank funded the construction of a dam that displaced 2 million people, flooded 360 square miles, and wiped out 81,000 acres of forest cover. In Brazil, it spent $1 billion to develop a part of the Amazon basin and to fund a series of hydroelectric projects. It resulted in the deforestation of an area half the size of Great Britain, and has caused great human suffering because of resettlement. And now, my beloved country, Kenya. In Kenya, the Bura irrigation scheme caused such a desolation that a fifth of the native population abandoned the land. The cost was $50,000 per family served. I want you to think about that. In Indonesia, the transmigration program mentioned previously has devastated tropical forests. At the same time, the World Bank is funding reforestation projects. The cost of resettling one family is $7,000, which is about 10 times the Indonesian per capita income. And who will be able to pay these things? You know, and I'll be very careful as I say this. Somebody said that we are living in a country which is already sold out. So that the very companies, industries that we see in our nations in Africa, they don't belong to the countries that are hosting them, but they belong to the foreigners. Almost everything in our country has been sold out. Everything in our nations, these nations of Africa, has been sold out to, and it is not about selling out. When you don't pay the loans, they take over, and what do? They say, we will run this company or this project for certain years to regain or to get back our money, and then hand it over to you again. Whenever you hear such a thing being announced on the TV, on the radio, or you read it in the newspaper, or a certain country has decided to run this project in this country for these years, then give it back to the country, you understand one thing: money has been borrowed and it has not been paid, and that is the only strategy to pay it back. Now, when they do this, sometimes what happens, even the people of the country do not get their jobs in those companies. You'll find that they are run by the foreigners, they are maintained by foreigners, and we have our children who have gone to school. They have their degrees, they have their masters, they have their PhDs, qualified to do the work in those companies, and yet the projects in those companies, they are given to the people from outside the country. And that is why you find that there is a high population of young men who do not have jobs. It is not that there is no jobs. There are jobs, but they are given to the people who are running the country, who are not even the citizens of that country. Continued on. Livestock projects in Botswana led to the destruction of grazing land and the death of thousands of migratory animals. This resulted in the inability of natives to obtain food by hunting, forcing them into dependence on the government for survival. While Nigeria and Argentina are drawing in debt, billions from the World Bank have gone into building lavish new capital cities to house government agencies and the ruling elite. In Zaire, Mexico, and the Philippines, political leaders become billionaires while receiving World Bank loans on behalf of their nations. In the Central African Republic, IMF and the World Bank loans were used to stage a coronation for its emperor. The record of corruption and waste is endless, but the real eye-opener is in the failure of socialist ventures, those magnificent projects which were to bring prosperity to the underdeveloped countries. Here are just a few examples. Since this game results in a hemorrhage of wealth from the industrialized nations, their economics are doomed to be brought down further and further. A process that has been going on since Bretton Woods. The result will be a severe lowering of their living standard and their demise as independent nations. The hidden reality behind the so-called development loans is that America and other industrialized nations are being subverted by that process. Hind is not an accident, it is the essence of the plan. A strong nation is not likely to surrender its sovereignty. Americans will not agree to turn over their monetary system, their military, or their courts to a world body made up of governments which have been despotic to their own people, especially since most of the regimes have already revealed anti-American hostility. But what I think that Edward G. Griffiths doesn't understand Revelation chapter 13, that America is the second beast, the lamb-like beast, and it will play along the strings of the first beast, which is the papacy. But if Americans can be brought to the point where they are suffering from a collapse of the economy and from a breakdown in civil order, things will be different. When they stand in bread lines and face anarchy in their streets, they will be more willing to give up sovereignty in return for assistance from the World Bank and the UN peacekeeping forces. This will become even more acceptable if a structured demise of communism can be arranged ahead of time to make it appear that the world's major political systems have converged into the common denominator of social democracy. And that is why you hear we talk of one World Bank and one military, one government, and that is the confederacy against those who are called the children of God. What is the final play in all this? The underdeveloped nations, on the other hand, are not being raised up. What is happening to them is that their political leaders are becoming addicted to the IMF cash flow and will be unable to break the habit. These countries are being conquered by money instead of arms. Soon they will no longer be truly independent nations. They are becoming mere components in the system of world socialism planned by Harry Dexter White and John Maynard Keynes. Their leaders are being groomed to become potentates in a new high-tech feudalism, paying homage to their lords in New York, and they are eager to do it in return for privilege and power within the new world order. That is the final play. The essence of socialism is redistribution of the wealth. The goal is equality, and that means taking from the rich and giving to the poor. At least that is the theory. Unfortunately, the poor are never benefited by this maneuver. They either do not get the money in the first place, too much is siphoned off by the bureaucracies which administer the programs, or if they do get any of it, they don't know what to do with it. They merely spend it until it is gone, and then no one has any money except, of course, those who administer the government programs. Nevertheless, politicians know that promises to redistribute the wealth are popular among two groups: the voters who naively believe it will help the poor, and the socialist managers who eat as a job security. Supported by these two voting blocs, election to office is assured. And so, the ultimate goal is actually in voting. And it is interesting when you talk about voting that the highest block of voters are Christians, when they should be refraining from such acts, because you are putting thieves in the offices. And some people say, you know what, if I refrain from voting, still I'll be part of the evil because I did not put the right person in the office. Some evil people have decided to put him in office, and I don't have to complain, because if I had gone to kill the line and vote, then I could have averted the problem in those offices. No, you are really mistaken. Really, really. If you ever followed politics, you will know that it is not the one who wins that takes up the position. And we can talk about this. You can go to the internet and find out the facts about politics and voting and the winners of politics. They have to bow down to the powers that be. They have to be under the control of the businessmen who have a large chunk of their businesses running in the nations. And you see, businessmen cannot just allow anyone to come into presidency whom they don't know how he will handle their businesses. They are the people who thrive in a nation. And so you can't just come into presidency to interfere with the businesses of businessmen like they didn't invest in it. They have to decide who is going to be the president of any nation. They have to meet you. You have to state your policies, how you are going to protect the business, how you are going to, what are you going to do as a president or as a king or as an emperor. People don't just wake up in the day they cue the line and they vote and they say, this is our president. There's nothing like that. You continue to be deceived, but there's nothing like that. I say that in the camera. You go vote, but there's nothing like placing somebody in the office with your vote. And that has to be clear, whether in this nation or whether whichever nation. We know all about these things. And so this financial system, they come down even to the voting. And you find that the blocks that are highest in voting are the Christians also, who put these people in offices, where we have to refrain from politics. Politics and Christianity do not go hand in hand. Think about this. A politician comes in your area and says, you know, when I'm elected, I'll be able to build this road. You wonder, somebody who has just been loitering around the village, and yes, he is a graduate and he has his education, but he has been unemployed. Now he is promising people who are even more educated than him that he will do this and this. And why does he have that confidence to lie to the people? Because his promise is relying on the promise of somebody else seated in an office somewhere in a very different country than his country. And so he promises that, he works on that promise, he lies to you, he gets in the office, and you know, these people, sometimes I have seen, they give bribes to the people. You see people lining and they are given 100 shillings, 50 shillings, 200 shillings to vote for certain MPs, governors, and all these people. And they get into office, and when they get into the office, sometimes you hear these careless statements, oh, I gave you what you deserved, and so give me another time, I'll be able to speak to you. These are wonderful things, by the way, to hear about. And so you put him in office for 200 shillings and he is reaping, and he has to take back what he gave to you to get into the office. I know people do understand what I'm saying. And you find the same people are the same people that the same people we go to pray for them to get into the offices. We, on their day of coronation, they kneel before the religious leaders, they are prayed for, and when they get into these offices, the things that they do, you will never relate them to Christianity. And so this is the kind of the world we live in, a world full of hypocrisy, a world full of lies. And God says that you cannot serve God and serve Satan at the same time. You cannot serve light and darkness at the same time. All these regimes and their financial assistance and their funding is a world full of darkness. And if we knew what is happening, then we shall spend more time in building the kingdom of Christ than involving ourselves in politics, rioting that are sponsored, and this drumming for projects which are meant to bring recession and inflation in the nation. We shall be so careful how we deal with this worldly kingdom, because we are citizens of another kingdom and we have become ambassadors to this kingdom that we are in. And so an ambassador is somebody sent from another country to represent that country to another nation. And he doesn't have to interfere with the things of the other kingdom that he is in. All he has to do is be careful to make sure that he is representing his country fully, his kingdom fully. The question remains, are we representing our kingdom fully? Or are we still belonging to this worldly kingdom? Christ says that my kingdom is not of this world. If it were so, then my disciples will fight for it. And so we find that we are so involved in the governments of this world and in the kingdoms of this world so intensely that working for the prosperity of the kingdom of God on this day of atonement is something that has been lost off by many families, and now we have to narrow down. Even the Seventh-day Adventist families, they are just Seventh-day Adventist families by name. But they will be in church on Sabbath, but they are planning things, how they can continue in their offices. This is the sad story of the financial system of this world and how it has plunged people in darkness, and people have been kept in ignorance in what is happening actually. Now, the rules of bailout, as I bring this to an end, the rules of bailout. Rule number 1. Commercial banks in the industrialized nations, backed by their respective central banks, create money out of nothing and lend it to the governments of underdeveloped nations. They know that these are risk loans, so they charge an interest rate that is high enough to compensate. It is more than what they expect to receive in the long run. When the underdeveloped nations cannot pay the interest on their loans, the IMF and the World Bank enter the game as both players and what? Referees. You think this is funny, but it's not funny, but just listen to me for a moment. Using additional money created out of nothing by the central banks of their member nations, they advance development loans to the governments, which now have enough to pay their interest on the original loans, with enough left over for their own political purposes. Number 3, the recipient country quickly exhausts the new supply of money, and the play returns to point number 2. What is point number 2? When the underdeveloped nations cannot pay the interest on their loans, the IMF and World Bank enter the game as both what? Players and referee. So they use up what they have, and when they can repay, in number 3, we just go back to number 2. More loans, more interest, not being able to pay. The time, however, the new loans are guaranteed by the World Bank and the central banks of the this time, the recipient country quickly exhausts the new supply of money, and the play returns to point number 2. This time, however, the new loans are guaranteed by the World Bank and the central banks of the industrialized nations. Now that risk of default is removed. The commercial banks agree to reduce the interest to the point anticipated at the beginning. The debtor governments resume payment. And so this is fraud, and this is what I was calling legal fraud, because they give you money at a higher interest. They know what they are doing, that this is a loans that have risks, and so they put the interest high. And so you reach at a point, you have paid the interest upon the loan, but you can't pay back the debt. Yet at the back, they know that you have paid all your money. They are only holding you hostage to an extra pay, because they have recovered their money plus the interest. And so whatever that is remaining that you can pay, actually to them is nothing to them. Even if you default, it is nothing to them. But because they don't want to show you what is happening, what they do, they say that, okay, you have been defeated to pay back our loan. Let us service it. Give you more money, more interest on it, and you pay back slowly. They recovered their money a long time ago. And here, you are still slaves to something you paid, but you don't know you paid. Such a fraud. And that is why the kind of financial system that is in this world cannot be approved of heaven in any way. God is not a thief, but these financial systems are made up of robbers. And the sooner we come out of them, the better. God allowing, we shall come out of these things. But in order for us to come out of it, we have to know, who do we depend on? Is it this government or is it Christ? Can Christ provide for us that which is enough for us to live on? Can we live within our means and still live a happy and healthy life? Or do we have to continue going to this system so that we may be able to live? People who have become Christians, yet they don't have faith, are the worst people that can ever exist on the face of the earth. Because while professing to be this, actually they are living a life that is different from what they are professing. Continued on, we are told the final play is, well, in this version of the game, there appears to be no final play because the plan is to keep the game going forever. To make that possible, certain things must happen that are very final indeed. They include the conversion of the IMF into a world central bank as Keynes had planned, which then issues an international fiat money. Once that bank of issue is in place, the IMF can collect unlimited resources from the citizens of the world through the hidden tax called inflation. And so, I want to bring this to a close. I'll be going to conflicts between trade, confederacies, and labor unions in part 4. There is, as we bring this to an end, there is a possibility that there is no country which still belongs to its citizens, but all countries belong to IMF and the World Bank. It is very true that when a loanee fails to pay the debt, what he owns becomes an asset, surety or collateral. Just as you do in these local banks, that when you go to get a loan, you give your title deed, you give your logbook, or you give whatever you have as an asset, as a trust that will pay back. So when a country is taking a loan, it has to give what we call the collateral or the asset or the surety. What do they give? What does the government own? By the way, who is the government at the end of the day? You see, the government is we. We are the people. We are the government. What you call the government, maybe you may think that the cabinet ministers and the president, they are the government. No, they are not the government. We are the government. And so that is why you hear that we are told that all lands belongs to the government. A few select people, the rich of the country. And so what the bank will do, a nation hands in their companies, their certificate of businesses, and then they get the loan. Let us read it. It is very true that when a loanee fails to pay the debt, what he owns becomes an asset. So you may say that, oh, Mombasa Harbour has become an asset of the World Bank. You can say that the Lake Victoria is an asset of the World Bank. I'm just saying that in quotes. Or some certain hotel of the government is an asset to the IMF or the World Bank. So this one, no one disagrees yet. When we say the countries who have defaulted to pay their loans, their properties becomes the asset, surety or collateral of IMF and the World Bank, there is shouts of conspiracy theory. But I'm unraveling you the plan of the financial system towards the forming of trade unions that will at last control the buying and selling and plunge the whole world into this stressful moment. You hear what Edward G. Griffin says? That I'm unraveling you the plan of what? The financial system towards the forming of what? The trade unions that will at the last control the buying and selling and plunge the whole world into distressful moments. It is interesting when actually that is mentioned, because that we are told, and this is presentation number 4, but I want just to read these two statements as we close. The work of the people of God is to prepare for the events of the future, which will soon come upon them with blinding force. In the world, gigantic monopolies will be formed. Men will bind themselves together in unions that will wrap them in the folds of the enemy. A few men will combine to grasp all the means to be obtained in certain lines of what? Business. Trade unions will be done what? Formed, and those who refuse to join these unions will be marked men. Lastly, the trade unions will be one of the agencies that will bring upon this earth a time of trouble such as has not been since the world began. A few men will combine to grasp all the means to be obtained in certain lines of business. Trade unions will be formed, and those who refuse to join these unions will be marked men. Because of these unions and confederacies, it will be very difficult for our institutions to carry on their work in the cities. My warning is keep out of the cities, build no sanitariums in the cities, and I want just to end there. Edward G. Griffin says that I'm unraveling you the plan of the financial system towards the forming of trade unions that will at last control the buying and selling and plunge the whole world in the distressful moment. You heard it yourself. What is the solution? You go to part 1 of this presentation. What is the solution? That we will live within our means, have a land out of the cities, and we are told that those who possess a land in the country, they will live like kings and queens. And those who work with their hands diligently in the farm and not neglect their orchards, they will produce the bounty of the land because the earth has hidden treasures that men have been unable to unearth because they are too lazy to work on their lands. But as we have the easy money within us, easy expenditures, at last we are headed to a time of trouble that will never be seen in this world, when actually we find ourselves, we are owning nothing and we'll be happy with that. And that is the saying. That almost sounds like an American dream. Own nothing but be happy about it. There will be nothing to be happy about it because it will be a 24/7 hour economy. There will be no worship, and the devil says that because of food and clothing, the whole world will be under my control. He says that the keeping of the Sabbath will turn to be a disloyalty to the governments, to the powers that be. And so I hope that we start getting the gist of the matter on what actually the gigantic monopolies behind the scenes are doing in order to plunge the world in time of trouble such as we have never seen. May the Lord help us to understand Revelation 13:17, that no man might buy or sell if they do not have the mark of the beast. Lastly, I'd like to put this quote on the screen. That is it 60, page 11? Is it 60? Let me find out. Yes, 60, page 17, paragraph 1, we read thus. The light we have received upon the third angel's message is the true light. The mark of the beast is exactly what it has been proclaimed to be. Not all in regard to this matter is yet understood, nor will it be understood until the unrolling of the scroll. But a most solemn work is to be accomplished in our world. The Lord's command to his servant is, cry aloud, spare not, lift up the voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. Isaiah 58:1. And you know, the mark of the beast is just what it has been proclaimed to be, Sunday sacredness. And no one might buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast. But how this thing will come to play out has not been revealed, but we are promised that as the scroll unroll, we shall be able to understand these things. May we be part of the wise men who shall be able to understand the times that we are living in and be prudent, see the danger and hide ourselves, rather than be simple and we be overtaken by what is coming. The Lord bless us and the Lord keep you. And until part 4, where we shall be looking at Revelation 13:17, the financial system and the coming crisis, conflicts between trade confederacies and labor unions. God be with you, and bye for now.